So if you have seen the movie, think about it for a second, or if you know the Batman universe. Who is a noble, heroic figure, someone who acts as a public leader, but this is a person who suffers from a fatal flaw? Think of the Dark Knight. Think of some of the characters named Batman. Well, if you have seen the movie, you may already be kind of screaming at your computer at this point. It's talking about Harvey Dent, the amazing lawyer, public defender, who eventually becomes the villain Two-Face. Now, his fall, that tragic fall, that big fall is him, echoes a lot of the patterns of the tragic hero. A tragedy follows a certain trajectory, and there's some ideas, and there's many other Greek terms that explain this trajectory. Again, you have that hamartia, the tragic flaw, and with any play, you start by being introduced to the tragic hero, the setup, but that's certainly not the ending of it, right? There's going to be a number of Greek terms I'm going to throw at you, and I do want you to be familiar with these because it's interesting to track any good tragedy. The first one I want you to know is peripeteia. Now, the peripeteia is the moment where, as a result of the tragic flaw, the hero takes an action which causes his downfall. Now, this is important for a number of different reasons. This peripeteia, again, is the moment of this inflection. There's a sudden, what's called a reversal of fortune from happiness to disaster. This person has everything on the top of his game. Everyone's looking up at him and all these positive, like heroic qualities. And then, boom, something happens, completely flipped, moved around. And most importantly, this is something that the hero unwittingly brings upon himself as a result of his tragic flaw. So if you had a classic tragic hero example, someone who does have that hubris, someone who's proud, someone becomes a bit too aggressively proud, has and suffers a major mistake because of his pride. Maybe this hero overlooks something because he thinks, I'm so great, I can't even think, and not even going to bother me. And then boom, he gets taken down. In The Dark Knight, Harvey Dent is an amazing public defender, right? He's called the White Knight. He's the person who's going to clean up the streets of Gotham and does everything in his power and is so polarizing and so black and white that he refuses to stand and to compromise. His flaw is that inability, that inflexibility. And it's good at first. You want to be principled, but too much, and you get to take it to the extreme. In the movie, the peripeteia moment for Harvey Dent is, at least I'd argue, when he starts taking things too far. He captures one of the Joker's henchmen and then begins torturing him, begins violently sort of attacking him because he wants to get the Joker by any means whatsoever. He starts to take this dip, and because of these moments, some terrible things kind of happen. He gets punished by the Joker, he gets captured, and it turns out that he's eventually scarred for life and becomes something super terrible. The next Greek term to be familiar with is called the anagnoresis. This comes after the peripeteia, and this is the moment where after the peripeteia, the hero realizes his mistake and understands his tragic flaw. This is that eureka moment. Many of us are blind to our own flaws, right? If we were aware of it, we probably would compensate for it, and then it wouldn't be a flaw. The anagnoresis is when the light bulb turns on. Because of something that has happened, the hero, something blows up in his face, and he loses something important or loses everything important to him, and he has this aha moment. The hero can't undo what's happened. It's long gone and done at this point, but he has greater self-awareness, which allows him to move forward in his life more productively. Here's where the Dark Knight analogy begins to kind of deviate. If this were a classic Greek tragedy, Harvey Dent would understand that his inflexibility and this principle taken too far cause him something. He might suffer some giant loss, but he would live to tell the tale and he would learn from the mistake. However, that doesn't always make for excellent action movies in the 21st century, so instead he becomes the villain Two-Face and begins wreaking his own revenge on Gotham. Not exactly what Aristotle would say in a tragedy, right? You watch this hero, you watch this hero's fall, and then there's called the moment of catharsis. Now, this is important because it really doesn't have much to do with what's on stage, but everything to do with who's in the seats, and that's you guys. So the playwright arouses pity and fear in the audience. Now you might say, pity and fear, it's kind of interesting kind of reaction. Like pity, maybe you can understand. Pity is there because the audience comes to feel sorry for the character because of his flight. Oh my goodness, look at this poor person. I was rooting for him. He's really the good guy, but he suffers some huge tragedy, and oh, don't I feel bad for him. Certainly, there's pity. But after that, usually after that, comes a sense of fear. Now, you may wonder where fear is kind of coming from. This is not fear for the character, but fear for you. The audience worries that because they realize that the same fate could happen to them. Consider this tragic hero, this person who has the greatest qualities that people in the audience are supposed to look up to. Now, if the greatest person in the world can have this tragedy befall him, what does that say for a poor schmo like me? So the audience members, as a result of viewing the play, hopefully change their actions to avoid the same problem as the tragic hero. It's kind of like that moral or takeaway value. So again, this has everything to do with what Aristotle thinks makes the best tragedy possible. This rise and fall of the hero. You meet this person, he's fantastic, you're rooting for him, you see something happening to him, you feel terrible, and then you start to reflect upon yourself. Now, this was all about Greek tragedy, but again, we are reading this in service of Othello, which is Shakespearean tragedy. Now, you have read Romeo and Juliet. Please don't roll your eyes at that. And we're going to take a look at how Aristotle and Shakespeare are kind of butting heads against each other. Now, Shakespeare will have grown up reading Aristotle. Any good playwright worth his salt at the time will be familiar with some of the classics from the ancient Greek days. However, Shakespeare is going to add his own kind of spin to the mix. So how are these things different? Here's the first one. This notion that in Greek tragedy, the hero almost always lives on to reflect on the knowledge gained. After that anagnoresis, the person kind of understands a lot more about themselves and then goes on to change and live their lives differently. If you do remember Romeo and Juliet, there aren't a whole lot of people left at the end of that. Shakespearean tragedies are classically bloodbaths, but at least one person needs to be alive at the end in order to tell the tale. The question as we go into Othello is who's going to be on which side of the aisle. In Greek tragedy, again, the spectacle and gore must stay fully off stage, or at least that's what Aristotle thinks. Shakespeare begs to differ. Most of the big stuff is going to happen off stage, but there are certainly more exciting fights, more action, and certainly a lot of killing that is going to be staged often and right in front of the audience. So what's the same, you may ask, and why even bother rolling in the Poetics if there's really going to be some deviations? Well, Shakespeare certainly relies on and extends the notion of the tragic hero as a literary figure. This person who is an admirable figure taken down as a result of a tragic flaw or some circumstance that could have otherwise been prevented. Think of a hypothetical accident, right? Which one of these two would you consider more tragic? An accident, a freak of nature, or something that you couldn't have seen coming? Or something you maybe could have seen coming or totally makes sense that it should have happened and you could have easily prevented it, but you just didn't. Maybe you were blind to yourself or you were blind to the realities of other people around you. But if you had only known then what you know now, everything could be different. That's the real twinge of tragedy. Also, the idea of this sudden reversal of fortune from happiness to disaster, something that's ultimately brought upon the hero by himself. This is a person who has everything or seems to have everything and then loses it. Now, it may be faster, it may be slow, but this reversal of fortune is fairly quick. And lastly, this idea of a moment of understanding, that cathartic situation, both for the hero and for the audience. If you recall this notion of dramatic irony, this is something we're going to lean on a lot in Othello. The idea where you as the audience understand or know more than the characters in the play. This is a cathartic moment for you as well. You can kind of see the train starting to sort of go off the rails, but you are powerless to stop it because it is just a play at the very end. So overall, Shakespeare certainly extends the ideas that Aristotle's kind of bringing on from this notion of tragedy, and it's going to be something that we will certainly profit from. Without when it comes in for Othello, and it's good to know the basics. All right, thanks for following along with the ride, and we will see you in class.